Hello, AP Environmental Science students. In today's screencast, we're going to continue talking about Chapter 3, which is ecosystems. What are they and how do they work? All today's notes are based off of Living in the Environment, the 16th edition by Miller and Spoolman. So for those of you coming straight from bio last year to this class, to APES, it's going to be a lot of review when we go over this section. My upperclassmen, my juniors and seniors, if you remember back to bio, hopefully this is a lot of review for you. But the two major ideas here are that ecosystems contain living or biotic and non-living or abiotic components. The second is that some organisms produce the nutrients they need, others get their nutrients by consuming other organisms, and some recycle nutrients back to producers by decomposing the waste and remains of organisms. So our first little review is that ecosystems have both living and non-living components. Abiotic factors are non-living factors. Those are things like water, air, nutrients, rocks, heat, solar energy, etc. Biotic factors are going to be all the living things. So that includes things that were once living. So dead organisms fall under biotic factors as well. When we talk about different species will and their populations will thrive under different physical and chemical conditions. So for example, some plants need a lot of sunlight and others need shade to grow in their optimum place. This is called a range of tolerance. So the range of tolerance is just a range of physical and chemical variations in which a particular organism can survive. Other examples include temperature. So this figure right here talks about the optimum range for these fish, and they live best in this middle area here. And when it gets too cold, first we have this zone of intolerance. There are no fish here. Zone of stress, we have a couple of fish. And then if we go to the other extreme, too hot of temperatures, again, zone of intolerance, no, none. Zone of physiological stress, a few fish. There are several abiotic factors that can limit population growth, and we call these limiting factors. Again, this should be a review from bio. And limiting factors are abiotic factors that regulate the growth of a population. So basically, this leads to something called the limiting factor principle, which says that too much or too little of any abiotic factor can limit or prevent the growth of a population, even if all the other factors are at a great level. So for example, with plants, if we have a plant that has good soil, good sunlight, plenty of space to grow, if for some reason it doesn't get water, my plant is not going to survive. It's not going to make it. It's not going to reproduce. If it gets too much water, the same is true. My plant will still die. Baking a cake kind of works the same way. If you have all of your other ingredients, but all of a sudden you realize you ran out of flour, your cake is not going to come out like a cake. It's going to be like a flat, hot mess. So you need to have all of those factors to be in the optimum range, or their range of tolerance, in order for things to actually grow, survive, and reproduce. So this next section should be a big review as well. So first we have trophic levels. Trophic level is a feeding level assigned based on what an organism uses for food. Our first trophic level is our producers or our autotrophs. These are our self-feeders. A producer is an organism that uses solar energy or chemical energy to manufacture the organic compounds it needs as nutrients, so things like glucose, from simple inorganic compounds obtained from its environment. So there's two ways producers can do this. We talked a lot about photosynthesis in biology. Photosynthesis is our complex process that takes place in cells of green plants. It uses energy from the sun, it combines carbon dioxide and water, and it produces oxygen and glucose. Chemosynthesis happens if there's no sunlight involved. It's usually at like those really deep trenches in our oceans where light doesn't penetrate. And this is a process where certain organisms, mostly some specialized bacteria, extract inorganic compounds from their environment and convert it to organic compounds without light. Then we have our consumers. Consumers are also called heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are organisms that must obtain their nutrients by feeding on other organisms or their remains. So we have our primary consumers are herbivores. Those are plant eaters, rabbits, grasshoppers, deer, or zooplankton. Our secondary consumers are carnivores. There are meat eaters that eat primary consumers, so things like hyenas, spiders, and frogs. Tertiary consumers are meat eaters that eat secondary consumers. These can also usually be our top carnivores. These are things like tigers, wolves, hawks, orca whales. And then we have omnivores, which are kind of scattered in between those trophic levels or those levels of consumers. And they're meat and plant eaters, things like pigs, foxes, and us. Then we have decomposers. Decomposers are consumers that release nutrients from the dead bodies in plants and animals and return them to the soil or water or air. So these are things like bacteria, fungi like mushrooms. We also have a specialized type of decomposer, and this we did not talk about in bio last year. And these specialized decomposers are called detritivores. These are organisms that feed on the wastes or dead bodies of other organisms. And that waste or dead body, we call that detritus. And examples of a detritivore are mites, earthworms, catfish, large scavengers like vultures. So when any organism acquires food, it has to turn it into energy. So in bio, we talked a lot about cellular respiration. In this class, we're going to call it aerobic respiration. And aerobic just means it uses oxygen. So this equation should look really familiar to you. We take glucose plus oxygen, and it gives us carbon dioxide, water, and energy, or ATP. And then here's the chemical equation below it. We also have a second type of respiration, and this is anaerobic respiration. It's also called fermentation. And this is where some decomposers get their energy by breaking down compounds without oxygen. So this can produce gases like methane or hydrogen sulfide or acetic acid. And fermentation is actually what yeast do. So that methane is the gas that we get that helps our bread rise. All those little crevices in the bread are full of methane. So the main idea of this whole unit, or this whole section, is that ecosystems are sustained through one-way energy flow from the sun and nutrient cycling from our key materials. So sun starts everything, gives its energy to our producers. Our producers, without them, we would not be here because they start our energy flow to herbivores, carnivores, our omnivores. When they die, decomposers break them down. The chemicals and nutrients from their dead bodies are then recycled by those decomposers and go back into our soils that the producers can then use with the help of solar energy to start the cycle over.